a survey. We ask that you take a few moments to fill that out. Additionally, all attendees will receive a certificate of attendance and a link to the recording of this presentation. Robert, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Good morning, everybody. So my name is Robert Levy. I will be presenting to you some information that is useful if you are looking to install Revit Server in your company. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but it is meant to be a guide just to help you when you are considering the installation, so you know what's ahead and what you need to implement in order to get something like this running. So this presentation is meant to be in plain language. If I get too technical, just type in a message in the chat box and you can ask a question, and I'll be more than happy to answer. If you can, just leave the questions towards the end. Write a little note to yourself so you don't forget the question, and I'll be happy to answer them at the end of the presentation. Another thing I want to do is I want to have an idea a little bit of who I'm speaking to today, what my audience is. So I wanted to run a poll here just to get an idea of who we have. I wanted to know who we have here. We have some designers, drafters, IT, middle management. Just put that there. I just want to have an idea of who I'm talking to so I know how to better speak to you. Okay, so it looks like we have some IT. We've got pretty good blend, seems like. Okay, all right, good. So we've got about 1/3 of each type of role here. Great. Okay. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about, what is this Revit Server thing? What does it do? What are some of the requirements, recommendations before installing Revit Server? And we're going to go over some different company scenarios where Revit Server may benefit. I'm also going to show you some little tests that you can run to see how your network is performing, so you know how Revit Server is probably going to be performing. So the first thing about Revit Server is that what does it allow you to do? Okay, so traditionally, when we are working in a Revit project, we have work sharing, right? So we have our work sets, and we are saving to a central model on your local server somewhere in your office. So that's traditionally what's happening right now. And when you save to that server in your office, it's fairly fast, okay, in terms of the speeds, because you're saving to a computer that's inside of your network, local. Okay, it's a computer that's close to you. Okay. Now, what tends to happen is companies have a need to share models with other offices. So you might have a company that has 2 offices, one in California, one in China, and you want to collaborate on a project together. Okay, Revit Server allows you to collaborate in real time in a project out as far as China or another state or some other geographical locations. That's what it allows you to do. So this is why companies find it useful to implement Revit Server in their offices. So if you're wondering, that's basically what it helps you to do. As far as the user goes, okay, if I'm a Revit user, the work sharing process is the same. It's almost as if Revit Server is not even running. So if I'm a user that uses Revit Server and I want to, save my central model, I want to sync with central, do things like that, all those activities are pretty much the same as they have always traditionally been, as if you were working in your office locally without Revit Server. So it's really easy to use once you have it up and running. The difficult part is actually getting it up and running. Okay, um, so there are several options you have, but I'll go over some of those. So what Revit Server basically does is it creates a virtual hard drive, okay, and you can save your central model to that virtual hard drive on the server somewhere. And so what I'm showing here is an image of my save dialog box. So if I were to start a new project and I enable work sharing, right, I enable the work sets, and I save that project for the first time, if I want to put it on the server, on the Revit server, I get a little Revit server icon. Okay, so let me see here. That's that little icon right there. And all I do really is I click on that icon and I save my central model inside that location. And when you do that, it basically uploads my central model to the server somewhere. Now, there's a ton of things going on in the background, but that's basically it. Once you have it running, it's a piece of cake to actually use. It's only when you run into problems or install issues is where it gets complicated. But in essence, that's what it does. The other thing about Revit Server is you can have several servers in different parts of the country. So I can have one server in California, I can have another server in Illinois, and I can save models to both of those servers. So if I want to work just in my Illinois office and I sometimes want to share my model with California, I could actually store my model in Illinois. And then if I want to work out of California mainly, and I want to sometimes share my files with Illinois, then I can actually store my file in California. So that's the nice thing about it. It's very flexible and scalable. Okay, it doesn't force you to necessarily have the models in one location, and so you can have several main Revit server hosts is what we call them. Okay, and I'll explain some of that stuff. So what it does is when you save a file, it places this file on the Revit server, and what you have to understand is that once that file is on the Revit server, it's being managed by that server. And it's not like you can just copy it and paste it back onto your computer. It doesn't work like that, because once the server gets placed onto the computer on the server, right, it's actually converted. It's broken down a certain way. I mean, you don't see this, but it's actually broken down in there. So if you were to ever want to take it out of the Revit server, you would have to do a save as and then wait for it to download and convert back to a normal RVT project. Okay. So right now, what does it actually do? In a very simple sense, when you sync with Central, those changes get moved all the way up to the central model, much like it happens in a local machine. In other words, you're not uploading the entire model all the time. You're uploading just the changes, the work set changes that get saved to the server. Okay? And so I can have different users in different offices sync to that same central file, and that's the huge advantage of it. There's also another thing called a Revit Server Accelerator. Okay? And if you want to install it, you can have an accelerator which makes the transfer of data faster. Okay, so for example, you have an office in California and another one in Illinois. For optimal speeds, you want to have an accelerator in one of those offices, and you can have the host in the other office. And I'll talk about those a little bit more. So Revit Server, also another huge advantage of it is it allows you to work with many users. Okay, I'm talking about 100 users working at a time. Okay, that's a huge advantage, and what ends up happening is some companies end up going to Revit Server just because they can have a lot more users working on a model at a time. Whereas without Revit Server, you start to encounter problems when you start to have more than a number of users on a single model. So here are some of the recommendations that I can give you guys if you are going to install Revit Server. Before you even install it, get your IT personnel involved. The one thing about IT that I've noticed is that they generally know a lot about servers because that's really right up their alley, but a lot of times they don't know much or anything about Revit, and they tend to shy away from stuff like this. It's not rocket science, but it needs to be done right. But I'm sure an IT guy could handle it. The thing is that once you start to install it, you have to go onto the server, you have to configure and everything. Once it's installed, it's really simple as far as the usage. So the hard part is just getting yourself to install it. So definitely get an IT personnel involved that understands servers and knows how to log into servers and install services and stuff like that. Another thing is we do install Revit Server for clients, so if you're interested in having that installed for you, I think that would be a nice option, especially when there's that kind of disconnect between the IT and the Revit personnel. So that is a good option. Another thing, Revit Server is actually free. Okay, you can download it from the Subscription Center if you don't already know that. The expense comes in actually installing it because you have to allocate, staff to do it, and you have to get servers to actually get it up and running. So that's subscription.autodesk.com if you want to go and download it. Another thing that you need is you need to have either virtual servers that run on VMware or real servers that are dedicated to Revit Server. I have installed on VMware, so it does work on VMware, especially if you allocate enough resources to it. So VMware is like a little virtual machine. Okay, a VMware is like running a little computer inside of another big computer. So for example, I can have one computer that runs 5 machines on that one computer, that one physical computer. So that's what VMware basically is. And it gives IT professionals a lot of different possibilities of how they can work with their data. But in essence, VMware can work with Revit Server, or you can work with real servers. Autodesk recommends real physical servers. And I know what you're probably thinking, well, if you're an IT guy, you're probably thinking, well, real servers are maybe not as reliable as having VMware installed, and that's understandable. But it can work on both. Just make sure you allow a lot of resources, memory, and everything so that you get better sync speeds. So, there are some requirements of what you need, but I'll go over some of that. The other thing is you're going to need to have Windows Server software. So Windows Server 2008 or 2012 to install Revit Server. So Revit Server cannot be installed on normal Windows 7 machines or some workstation machine. You cannot do that. It needs a server environment to do it. So that's probably where most of your costs are going to be. And then all the offices need to be on the same domain. I can't stress that enough. If you're trying to share a Revit model with another office that is not part of your network, you need to all somehow get on one domain. Okay? And that's the way to share models on Revit Server. You all have to be on the same domain. It's not designed to be shared across different domains. And another thing is I know you love to have firewalls, but I've had countless problems with just the Windows firewall alone, let alone all the other types of firewalls that exist. When you install it, just make sure you disable the firewalls until you get it running. And then once you get it running, then it's fine. You can enable it, and then when it stops working, you can blame it on your firewall and not blame it on Revit server. So definitely disable firewalls. I know you've probably heard this a million times, but I still get calls all the time where there are firewalls running, and I've talked to IT guys that swear there were not firewalls, and then it turns out there are. So it has happened to me several times. Do we have any questions so far about any of the things that I'm talking about? Is everything making sense? Because I know that some of the stuff like VMware is kind of new to some people. It's been around for a while, but it's still new to people that don't have the background. You can go ahead and type in the question if you want. Is Revit 2012 R2 certified? It should work with revision 2. So when I installed on mine, I ran all the Windows updates and everything, and it runs fine. So yes, I don't know that it's certified necessarily, but it's supposed to work. So if you look on the system requirements and you read there, it will specify exactly what it works with and what it doesn't work with. There's a nice image that has a little table that shows you which ones it works with. So do I recommend Hyper-V? That I do not know, because I have not had that technology, the Hyper-V technology. I haven't used that technology yet, so I don't know. I wish I could tell you that, but I might be able to do some research and find out for you. Are there any recommended settings for Revit Server or VMware? What I recommend is that you look at the system requirements and make sure that you allocate plenty of memory for VMware, meaning about 16 gigabytes of RAM for VMware. For the price of RAM nowadays, there's no reason not to allocate that, because Revit Server needs RAM. It needs about 4 to 16, but go ahead and allocate 16. 8 is probably an okay number, but I mean, do definitely allocate that. And then as far as settings, yeah, I don't know that there's any particular setting. If you install a virtual copy of Windows Server, just make sure that you install a copy from scratch. Just have a dedicated machine just for Revit Server, because what will tend to happen is you might have to shut down the server and restart it for whatever reason, and it will make it a lot easier for the users. So yeah, just allocate a separate VMware session for that installation with Windows Server, and make sure you install all of the updates for Windows. This is not stressed enough. I've actually tried to install Revit on certain machines that it would not install, and it wouldn't even give me an error message of why it wouldn't install. And it turns out it was because I didn't have the Windows updates. So before you even think about installing Revit Server, spend the day or so. It actually took me like a day and a half, I think, to get all the Windows updates in there, which is insane, but it is what it is. So make sure you get all the Windows updates in there. Thank you. Those are great questions. Been running Revit Server for about a year. Not runs great on VMware. Great. That's good to hear. Yeah. The installations I've done have all been on VMware, so it actually runs really well as far as I can see, but there must be some reason why Autodesk recommends to have real machines dedicated to it, and they don't really specify why, but I'd probably be curious to find out. Another thing is if you have riverbed technology, riverbed steelhead, if you've never heard of this, it's a great technology. It allows transfers of data through the internet. that are much more efficient. So in essence, if you're transferring data, it converts that data, it does things to that data to allow it to be transferred much more quickly. So for example, it makes the transfer, it somehow remembers some of the data that you transfer and how it's transferred, and by doing that it reduces the amount of data that you transfer, as well as optimize how much data is being transferred, so it compresses and things like that. It's supposed to be a really great technology, so if you're thinking about this type of collaboration, you might want to think about something like Riverbed Steelhead, and I don't sell anything for Riverbed. I'm just going by what what I read and you know, my experience with what people have told me about how it works. So do think about it, because you always want to have the best performance possible when you're collaborating via long distance. So if that's going to help, it definitely might be worth it, because if you think about it, you're dealing with a number of employees, you're dealing with a lot of labor overhead. So any slowdown that occurs affects many people's time. So many people's times multiplied by many people's wages, that's a lot of money that you're saving if you can make the speeds faster for them. So okay, so a couple things for those of you guys who are not really aware. So you have your LAN, okay, and you have your WAN, right? So if you ever hear the term LAN, that's just your local area network. Those are the computers that are in your office right now. They're usually connected in a LAN, okay? And then if you have another office, that other office has its own LAN. And then if you want to connect those two offices together, you have basically a wide area network, which is a WAN, okay? So whenever people say, oh, Revit server, it allows you to collaborate over the WAN. That's basically what it is. You're collaborating over the wide area network, okay? So this is just a little visual of what's happening in your LAN right now when you're collaborating on a model. It's just going right there to the central, and it's actually, the way that it's being collaborated right now is actually less efficient than what Revit Server does, because Revit Server actually caches your model, whereas in your LAN, you don't really have a cache except for your local file. Well, that's sort of like a cache, but it's a little bit different. So let's talk about some of these terms. I explained about what VMware is, okay? The Revit server host, okay? When you do an installation, you have a host. This is the computer that holds the model. If something goes wrong with your host, you are toast, okay? Nice little rhyme there for you. The host is the one that commands everything that everybody is syncing. So if I were to make a change to a Revit server model, it always goes and talks to the host first and sees what kind of model the host has before it sends it out to the computer or the accelerator. So the host is the main one that holds the file. When you do a Revit server install, you really only need one host. That's really all you need to get it going. But I can 90% guarantee you that you're going to have to get an accelerator, because the accelerator is the one that caches the model, okay? So it's the one that actually has another copy of the model that syncs up with the host, okay? So the Revit Server Accelerator is like the host's helper, okay? It constantly keeps a copy of the model so that users can download the latest changes much quicker, okay? And then you have this thing called a Revit Server Administrator, all right? When you have Revit Server installed, you generally have somebody that administers the software. In other words, somebody that can go on the server and lock the models or maintain the models, maybe move them to a different folder, or maybe there's somebody that has to shut down the server for any reason. Well, that person is the Revit Server Administrator, right? So when you install the Revit server, you tell it which computers, okay, you configure it so that certain computers have access to the administrator screen. So Revit Server Administrator is basically, it's just an interface. So if you look at my screen right now, this is the Revit Server Administrator screen. It's web-based, so you can access it from a browser. And if you have your computer as an administrator machine, you can lock down models so that users can't save to them, and you can move around files and do things to them. Okay, that actually was supposed to be closed out. Sorry about that. So in any case, this is what the Revit Server Administrator is. You access it by using your Revit Server name and Revit Server Admin 2015 or 2014, whatever version you're using. And then it takes you to this screen, and then it shows you, all of your Revit servers. It shows you on the screen. So I only have one main Revit server, but if I had two hosts, both of the hosts would actually show on the screen. So that's the scalability of it, how you can make it a much bigger network in the long run. It's kind of nice, actually. So an administrator is just a computer that has permission to access that screen. You have to specifically configure the computer to have permission to it. And then you also have cached files. So as I was explaining earlier, if you have a model of Revit server, that model is probably 100 megs, maybe more, maybe less. 100 megabytes is a big file as far as the internet's concerned. So if you have to save changes to that file or reload changes to the file, you don't want to be downloading 100 megabytes every time you make a change, right? So the way that they design Revit Server is you have this accelerator, and the accelerator holds basically that cached file, right? And the cached file is just a copy of the model. So the way it works, I'll explain it a little bit more visual actually, because this is just text, and I don't like to just have text. I'm a visual guy. But the easiest way to think about what a cached file is let's say you access a web page, right? Today I access web page XYZ, and then I looked at it, I did some stuff, and then tomorrow I go access the same web page again, right? Well, instead of downloading all of the data from the web page all over again, what your computer does is it saves all the things that you looked at yesterday. It saves that to your computer. And then tomorrow when you access it, your browser just compares. It compares your saved website to the one that's online, and it just downloads the changed items basically. So the cached file is the website that you downloaded when you looked at that website the first time, right? So it's the reason why people delete their histories, because they start to accrue so much data that it starts to get slow. So the Revit file works sort of the same way, but not really, okay? So let's talk about the Revit Server Accelerator a little bit and how that works. The accelerator always lives in a local office. So if you look here, I have, whoops. If you look here, I have this blue like box shape, sort of cube, and the dark blue one is the central model, and that's the host. And then I have this kind of light water aqua green, okay? The aqua green area is an office. So that could be like our Illinois office, which has many workstations, and it has an accelerator in it, okay? And so why does the accelerator make it faster? Well, basically, the accelerator, let's say that you have a user right here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but I'll turn my, okay. Let's say you have here this user. This user makes a change okay, and he syncs that change with central, right? That change goes to the accelerator, okay? Now that change, that wall that he might have created, it also goes to the host. So when he syncs something, it's actually going to the accelerator and to the host, okay? And okay, there you go. So what's actually happening is his change is going to two places. He doesn't see that. He doesn't see what's happening, but that's really what's happening. So what happens is when this user here on the left, I'm going to enable my pointer, when this user wants to reload latest or reload all the latest changes, he is reloading the changes from the accelerator because it's much faster to reload something from an accelerator than from the host because the host is far away. And so it allows him to load it faster because this model is constantly matching up with this model. So whenever Revit tries to load the changes, it says, do I have the latest copy of the central? And if the answer is yes, I do have the latest copy of the central, then it downloads it directly from the accelerator, which is way faster. So if you're just working locally and you're just making local changes, all of your saves would be a lot faster because a lot of those things that are being saved are just going to the accelerator, and the accelerator is taking care of the stuff going to the host. Okay. Now, if they save a change, oops, if they save a change or they try to reload a change and the host has the later model, then that takes a little longer because the host has to send it to the accelerator, and then the accelerator has to send it to the to the local user. Now, it doesn't really send it to the accelerator. It actually sends it directly from the host to the user, but the accelerator is constantly keeping tabs of that so that it always tries to have the latest copy. So whenever Revit has the ability, it'll always pull the data from the accelerator instead of the host. That's the bottom line. So if what I just explained doesn't make a lot of sense, basically think about it this way. Revit's always going to try to pull the data from the quickest possible way. Okay, if it cannot, it'll pull it directly from the host. Okay, so that's all you got to know about it. So let's talk about some different company scenarios where you might implement Revit Server. This is a very typical scenario. This is kind of the typical run-of-the-mill type of, yeah, I want Revit Server. You have 3 offices in 3 different states, and you all want to collaborate on a model. So we've got a California office. They might be doing interiors. We've got an Illinois office. They might be doing the structural and shell. And then we have the Texas office. They might be doing something else like the consulting MEP or whatever it might be. Very typical. So we can have the host be on the office that probably owns the model, that probably has the most ownership of the model. We probably want to put the host there. So in this case, let's say the host is Texas. Let's say they have the most ownership. Most of the users that are going to be doing most of the work is going to be there. So we'll probably put the host there. You usually want to put your host in your most centralized office. And then you have an accelerator in Illinois. So that accelerator, remember, it has the cache copy. And then we have another accelerator in California. Okay, so this is the most typical setup. You could also run this setup if you didn't have accelerators. So you could take out the accelerators and you could run it by just having that host. Now, obviously, each computer in the other offices, it would have to be configured to talk to the host. But you could get it configured where you only have a big host. And it is slower. And I've gotten an issue where, you install Revit Server and they're like, yeah, great, we got Revit Server running, and then they start using it and they're like, you know what, we better get an accelerator. So if you watch this presentation, you should have a pretty good idea that, you know what, we need to put some accelerators in there, and you'll know ahead of time, and you won't have to spend more time figuring that out and implementing it. All right, so here's another scenario. This is Revit Server was never designed for this, but Revit Server allows you to have way more users working on one model. So even if I have one office and I install Revit Server, it's still a great benefit because you can have a lot of users on one model. Okay, it somehow breaks the data down more efficiently. So what you could do is you could have your host. You could put a host right there in your office, and then use Revit Server to sync all your changes on those really, really large models. Okay, and it works quite well. Okay, and that wasn't really the intention, but it does work quite well. Supports over 100 concurrent users in different Revit models. I think I read something that it actually supports way more than that, but I don't want to get too promising here. Until we really see 100 concurrent users, I don't know how I'll feel about that. I kind of go more based on my experience. So yeah, this is actually a really good setup. I know of a lot of offices that when it comes to crunch time, they put a lot of users on that Revit Server machine, and this is a great way to make everything smoother as far as the data. So it actually puts data more efficiently when you sync with Central. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about, and this is some tests that you can run if you're going to install Revit Server. You want to know what your internet speeds are, your real internet speeds, not just what they tell you that it is, because what they tell you it is never the same that what it really is, because it depends a lot on network traffic and the time of day and all kinds of factors. So we have this term called network bandwidth. Okay, how much data can be transferred from one location to another at once? Revit Server looks at your network bandwidth as one of the factors. So if you have a really good bandwidth, it's just like having a really large diameter pipe. You can run a ton of water through that big diameter pipe. It's the same idea. Or maybe you have a 10-lane highway instead of a 2-lane highway, right? You can move way more data in one shot than with a 2-lane highway, right? That's the idea of bandwidth. And then you have latency, okay? If you have good latency, it means you could ping. You could ping and you could get a really quick reply, all right? So if you don't know what a ping is, a ping is just I send a little bit of data to a computer. The computer sends it back, and then I get a measure of how quickly it sent me that data back, okay? To ping, it's really easy. You just run the ping command on the command line, and what you're looking for is you're looking for less than 100 milliseconds average between any two Revit Server machines. All right. What does that really mean? What this means is this. I'm going to do a quick little ping here just to give you guys an idea. So I'm going to go to my command line, and then I'm going to go here to ping. I'm going to do -n, and then I'm going to go 60. And the 60 is how many different tries, how many different pings I'm going to do. It's going to average all that out and give me a nice average. All right, and that's what they say to do. So 60, and then I do, server name. So my server is, and by the way, sometimes you do the server name, it won't ping like that because a lot of the servers are by default, they're blocked like that. So you might have to type in the IP address of the server, okay? If you don't know what your IP address of your server is, you can find out very easily by going onto your server and just ipconfig or asking your IT guy, and there are many people that know how to find out the IP address, but basically mine is actually a little bit blocked, so I'm going to type in my IP address, and let's see. Okay, so when I hit enter, it goes through and ping, 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 ping. So each one of those lines is a little ping, okay? And it says time, 14 milliseconds, 22 milliseconds. So when it's finished, it's going to give me a nice average. And I did 60 of them. I probably should have done way less because it's going to take about a minute or so. But that's what it is. At the end, it's going to give you an average, and you want less than 100 milliseconds between any two Revit servers. So you want to do this ping between your California office and, computer and your Illinois office computer, and then you want to do that ping between your Illinois office and your Texas office. Okay, so you get on those servers, the servers that are going to be, and you run those pings, and then you can get an average and find out what you're. There you go. I got average 26 milliseconds. Wow, pretty darn good. I actually yesterday I had for some reason I had a huge lag. I had something like 400 milliseconds average. And I'm not sure if it's because we had so many users using it and just had really bad ping times yesterday. Really good today. So there you have it. All right, and then the last thing is you're going to test the bandwidth. Now this is a little bit more of a manual process to test the bandwidth because internet companies, they love to brag about how fast their internet is, and then you really need to do one of these tests to find out the truth of it all. And I love to do these tests. I love to find out the truth of it all to kind of wash right through all that, marketing and just get to the truth. So this is how you would test your bandwidth. Okay, you take a file and you read how many megabytes that file is. So, for example, I take a Revit file, and my Revit file, it could be whatever, okay, but just take one that is a little larger because you're going to get a more accurate reading when the file's larger because it takes longer to download it. Okay, so you take a file, you copy that file from your host server to your accelerator. Okay, so even before you install Revit server, you can just take the file, copy, host to accelerator, and you time it very careful. Okay, time it very carefully. And then what you do is you apply this little formula. You take the size of the file in megabytes, you times it by 8, you divide it by the time it took to copy the file. So get a nice timer on your computer or your cell phone or whatever and time it. And you could do this a couple of times so you get a nice average. It's always better to do it more than once because I did my test twice and I was actually close by just a few milliseconds. So I know I got a pretty good average, but you should always do it more than once. So you do this little formula, and then if your answer is more than 1, you should be good. Okay, I did this test. It was very useful to know, and our network actually performs better than I imagined. So thanks to our IT personnel, but it actually performs pretty well. And you want to run these tests whenever you have the highest network traffic. You want to assume the worst. So you want to run this test like 10 o'clock in the morning, whenever everybody's using internet, whenever everybody's using it. That's the best time to run it, right? Like 10 in the morning or a little bit later afternoon, after lunch, probably a couple hours after lunch when you got that heavy-duty traffic, right? That's when you want to run it. And you'll get a good reading, and you'll find out really what it is and what you're getting. Okay. So as far as what information I wanted to share with you, this is mainly the information. The Revit server install, a lot of that information you can get from the Wikipedia. If you want to install it yourself, you can get it from Wikipedia. What I recommend is I do recommend having somebody install it. We can do that for you if you want, or you can hire somebody to do it. But if you have it done that way, it's a lot less crash-proof. And the other thing is that if you have installed Revit server, there are a few things you want to keep in mind. Once you've installed it, you want to make sure that you shut down. If you ever have to shut down the server, that you shut it down properly. You turn it back on properly, because you can't just go to a Revit server and say, "Oh, shut down." It can corrupt your model. Okay. Once you corrupt your model, you're done. If you corrupt your model on your host, you're done. Now, you can still recover it if you have a local copy, but you can still corrupt it, and it happens for several reasons. It happens because the server wasn't shut down properly, but it also happens if the network transfer didn't transfer properly, or if a user was saving data and the data wasn't, that can happen. So it's just like any other work sharing project. It's not always perfect, but it works. It works. Once you get it installed, it's pretty transparent. It's very easy to use, in my opinion, and that's what I can share with you guys for now. And then we have some time for questions. If anybody has any additional questions about anything, I can be online until we finish up. For the firewall, there are certain ports that need to be open. That's a good question. Yeah, there are a couple of standard ports that need to be open. I don't know which ones they are, but in the wiki help, it does explain that. I think 2080 is one of the main ones. Which tend to cost more, a virtual or a physical server? We're a small firm with multiple offices. You know what? I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, I don't know the answer off the top of my head. I don't know. What I think costs the most is the Windows Server software that you need to install on the virtual server. I believe that's what costs the most, because the hardware is actually, if you had to buy hardware, it would be cheaper than buying Windows Server. So, and then the VMware, I don't know what the costs are to do that. So I'm probably not the best person to ask. The best person to ask would be an IT professional that has done an installation of VMware. They could definitely give you a good cost breakdown of that. Hyper-V runs great. Okay. So somebody mentioned here Hyper-V runs great. That's good to know. Have you installed Revit server on Amazon Web Services? No, I have not. Okay. If so, have you had any specific issues? No, I have not. I do not know what the complications are. In fact, I don't even know how the Amazon Web Services really work. If that's just like a virtual server that's in a server room somewhere, or I'm not sure how that is. But how do you back up projects? I presume it keeps the project data local to the server. How is this to be managed? What I can say about this is there are 3 different ways to back up projects. You can back up the individual files every now and then, or you can back up the entire server. There are ways that you can back up a server if you have IT personnel and backup software, and you could back up the server as it is. You just back up the whole virtual machine or whatnot. Okay, that's one way. Another way is, you can back up models to stay on the server, but I recommend that if you really want to back up properly, I recommend that you actually download the models to your local computers, at certain intervals, so that you have a backup that lives on your, LAN or on your local machines. Because if something goes down, then it's much easier to go to your local machine than to have to go onto the server and get it back up and move files around and try to get them from there. But yeah, see the wiki help. They tell you different ways to do it. You can even back it up using, like batch files and scripts. So there are ways to do it where it kind of gets automated in certain ways. Kind of nice. There are a particular segment of the market that uses Revit server more than other segments, construction, sheet metal, manufacturing. I don't believe there is. I'll tell you, I think Revit server, once people know what it is, I think all market segments would probably want to use it, because there are so many of our clients that I can think of that would benefit from it. That, I mean, how many projects do you hear about, whether you're in construction or whether you're in design, how many projects do you hear about that you're collaborating with somebody in another state or somebody in another country? I mean, all the companies that I've seen, I mean, maybe not all of them, but so many of them need that kind of collaboration, or at least could use it. So is there a particular market segment? I don't know. I can tell you there is a huge demand once people know what it is, but maybe the demand's not there yet because a lot of people don't even know about Revit Server. They might not even have heard of it. When the model is saved to Revit Server, the central file must be accessed from the Revit Server, or is the central file synced to the original location? When you're using Revit Server, the central model is placed on that server in that other state or wherever that server is. So when you're syncing, you are syncing to the actual server wherever it is. Okay? And it's pretty clear once you get Revit Server, it's pretty clear because the only way to open that model, once you put it up on the server, the only way to open it is to actually go to the little icon. And I'll show you guys this on my machine. I have Revit here. And if I go to open, right, open a model, I have my Revit server icon down here. And if I click on it, I have my server listed right here. And when I double click on it, I can click on the project right here. You see? So you have to actually go to that location to load it. And then when you open it, it creates a local file, which the local file does live on your computer. So that local file is actually a good backup for your model, because then you can make that local file essential if you need to, and you can put it back up on the server. Hope that answers the question. Yep, it must be accessed from the Revit server. Okay. We run Revit on Macs using Parallels. Can the Parallels virtual machine handle Revit server as well? Oh. Okay, more and more we got Mac users, yes. We have several clients that are running Revit on a Mac. It runs fine. It seems to run fine. I've had certain users that have had problems, video problems, running on Mac. They love to run Parallels. They refuse to run it on Boot Camp, and that's understandable because you don't have to freaking boot up the computer. But yeah, I don't know how well it runs on Mac, and I don't know if it even runs on Mac. I guess the only way to know is to actually try it, because I don't have any customers that have wanted to install Revit Server on a Mac. I don't know how a PC, you know, like a server, communicates with a Mac, and how the virtual machine runs and communicates with the server. I don't know if that would cause any problems, if it would freak the program out. I don't know. It may or may not. For a while, I know that Autodesk has not supported Macs, but underneath it all, it has worked in a lot of cases, but they've never wanted to actually support it until later. So it might work, but they just don't really tell you that it's necessarily supported, because they don't want to deal with if you have problems. So if you can get it running, awesome. But if you can't, it's kind of like bummer. Let's just not bother even with trying to support it. So that's kind of the philosophy, you know. It probably does run, I imagine, if you can get your Parallels to run just like a PC, and you can get it connect to the internet and everything just like a PC. It probably does, you know, probably. But I have not had any experience with it, so I cannot tell you with 100% certainty. In the session recorded, yes, the session is recorded. Please remind the listeners Revit Server is version specific. Yeah. So yeah, guys, if you guys install Revit Server, make sure that you install the correct version of Revit Server. So if you are still on Revit 2014, you need to have Revit Server, okay, 2014. So you can't just install 2015 and be done with it, okay? I can tell you this: if you can get one Revit server running, if you can get 2014 running, 2015 is a piece of cake to install, because they use the same types of settings, but you still have to set them both up, and you have to set up all the text files and everything so that it runs properly. So yes, you need whatever Revit you're running, you need that version of Revit Server. Revit Server has been around, I think, since even 2010 or 11, I believe. So it's been around for a while, but only now, I think, is getting easier to install. There's more information out there on how to do it properly and everything. Back then, I mean, there was really hardly anybody that can install it really that well or successfully. So thank you for that comment. Awesome. When the model is saved to the Revit server, the central file must be accessed from the Revit server, or is the central file synced to the original location? It's synced to the Revit server. I thought I just answered that. The model is synced to the server. You still have a local copy of the model, but it's got to be synced to that Revit server, the host. The host is what's the most important. So if even if your accelerator goes down, like, it'll still sync up to the host. And then when your accelerator comes back up, it'll start using the accelerator. Does Revit Server support other versions of Revit models? Okay, i.e. Revit Server supports 2013. Oh my gosh, you know what? I was actually wondering about that today. I do not believe it does. I think you have to install the older version. So yeah, pretty sure you have to install the older version. So this is what the user was saying. Does the sync happen to both accelerator and host? Yes. When you sync, it'll sync up with the accelerator and the host, because it's easy for you to send that information to two locations at the same time as far as the internet goes. So it sends it all to both. What about mobile users on VPN? Am I working from home? The performance will be lost since you not have a Revit accelerator. If so, is Autodesk considering a mobile client? Yeah, I don't know what Autodesk is considering, unfortunately. I don't have any insider knowledge on that. I wish I did. What about mobile user on VPN? I've never done a VPN install that we have users that are mobile. I've never done that kind of install, so I can't say for sure. But when I was at one of the tech camps, somebody was talking about problems with installing Revit Server with a VPN. So it might be problematic, so I'm not quite sure about whether that's a yes or a no, but yeah, if you're working from home, since further the loss, do not have yes. Yeah, if you are working from a VPN and you don't have an accelerator nearby, yes, the performance is lost, because the data is coming directly from the host directly to your computer. And, you know, it takes a while to do that, whereas if it was coming from another computer locally, it would be faster. So yes, if you do get it to work on a VPN and everything, it is lost. Is the accelerator also free? Yeah, it's all free. The accelerator, the host, it's all the same software, okay? It really, what's not free is to get it installed, to get, you know, Windows software to get it installed, and the server hardware software. The user uses accelerator connect directly at their site or to the host. Okay. All right. If you are a user at your location, you connect to both the accelerator and the host. You're connecting to both. You can even choose to not connect the accelerator. So there's a little option there when you get it running. You can actually choose not to connect to the accelerator if you don't want. But yes, if you have an accelerator, you are connecting to actually both at the same time if you really want optimal performance. I pinged our host server and I got some timed out. Okay. What causes that usually is the Windows firewall. Okay. So if you go to the firewall for your Windows, disable that, because the Windows, by default, the Windows firewall keeps you from pinging a server. That's a very common reason why you get the timeout. Good question. I had that happen actually on my occasion and a customer's occasion. Can the server send messages to the users, i.e. the model's not available until 8 a.m.? Unfortunately, no, but if you get some kind of a messaging application or something, like you know, these little chat applications like AOL Instant Messenger or something, which we actually have internally, that's a very good way to communicate with each other on the offices. Get yourself, if you're using Revit Server, or even if you're work sharing, get yourself you know, those free messaging applications for your office, and message each other and tell each other what you're doing. That will greatly help you. So no, I don't think it does. Okay, You can lock the models though on the host. So if you don't want anybody to access it, you can just lock it down until you do your thing, and then you can unlock it. What is the best way to shut down Revit Server? Okay, there are articles that show you how to shut down Revit Server in the Autodesk help section about Revit Server. Best way to shut it down is to go onto the server machine and lock it. You can lock the entire Revit server just by hitting a little lock. Let me see if I can show you here. You got, see this project? I can lock it on the super level up here. I can hit the lock and lock everything on that server, or I can lock particular projects. All right. Obviously, if you want to shut it down, you want to lock everything, so you just go to the super high up level and lock everything. Okay. So you have to shut down Revit server first, then the OS. Yes. Not only do you have to lock the models, but you also have to actually kill the Revit server applications, and it's not so obvious, but they tell you how to do it in the help section. You have to actually go to the services on your server, which you probably will need your IT guy to do because he's not going to want you fiddling with that. You go on the server, and then you close down a couple of applications, the Revit server app pool and another one, the W3W or something. And then that's how you actually close it down. And then once you're ready to come back up, you can probably reboot the computer and start the Revit server app pool, and then it starts everything up. So yeah, there's a little section that specifically tells you how to do that. It's not hard, but you need to do that because you don't want your models to get corrupt. God forbid. You have less corruptions using when Revit server versus local standalone server. I do not know enough to give you a good answer for that. I do not know, but I can tell you this. If Revit server crashes, hopefully you have a backup of it because you most likely are not going to be able to restore it. And Autodesk will not fix any files that are corrupt. They don't have the tools to fix corrupt files. You cannot. So yeah, I mean, Revit server, it probably has a little bit of a higher chance of having a corrupt file because the data is going a much longer distance. And if any of the packets get lost, then you could have problems. But I don't know enough to tell you whether Revit server has functions in place to know whether the packets are corrupt or whether they're not. But you know, if the model's corrupt, it will give you a message saying model's corrupt, cannot sync or cannot do anything. All right. When the model is saved to the Revit server, the central file must be accessed from the Revit server, or is the central file synced to the original location? Or answer that. Have you installed the Azure? Absolutely not. Have not installed on Azure. Is there a particular segment of the market? The team, one point after about 4 normal weeks, experienced strange wait time, the wait time after every command. This was a killer. Later we got a performance Revit server fix. That's good to know. So after you performed a fix on Revit server, the update, it fixed the lag on it. Yeah. Yeah, I know that Revit server, I know that there are still problems with it. I think the problem more is installing it properly. It's not always easy to get it installed properly. Usually once you install it though, it runs okay for the life of the project, but that's interesting. Is the Revit's accelerator free as well? Yes, I answered that. Can the remote local office host the model? Yeah. Or should all the models be in one central host? No, actually, it might even be better to put different models in different hosts, because then if one server goes down, you still have access to other servers. Maybe not the same models, but at least, you know, if one server crashes, you only lost half your data as opposed to losing all of the models. So yeah, I mean, redundancy I think can be good. VMware is expensive if you're comparing versus physical. Wow, so physical I guess is cheaper. Huh. Depends on if you can move other physical into a VM environment. Also, you need a lot more knowledge, not an average user setup. Kind of figured that. Here's a link to the hotfix. Thank you. Does Revit server host other types of files or just Revit models? Revit server is pretty much for Revit models from what I understand. So I think even the linked files, I don't know that it could even host linked files like the CAD files. So it's a good question. I think the CAD files need to live in your local machines from what I understand, but I could be wrong. I don't know for definitive on that. If our job site trailer has an unreliable internet, should I even install a Revit server there? Will it happen to sync to Central when the ISP is down for hours? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, if you have an unreliable internet, you probably don't want to do Revit server because it you might have problems down the line. But yeah, I don't know if they've implemented enough software fixes so that you can kind of recover your files if something goes wrong. But yeah, I would shy away from installing if you know your internet connection's kind of down and up. When the model saves to Revit server, the central file must be accessed. I already did that at one time. Serious security problem when sharing Revit using server outside firms. Has this been resolved? I don't know. I'm not sure what security problem you're accessing, but there's always security problems when you have servers involved because people can hack into your server, period. So in any case, there's always going to be security issues. Doesn't matter what server, Revit server, or any other server, you're going to have security issues because you're putting the data out there and available for people. How do you manage collaborating between architects and consulting engineers via Revit server? You mentioned everybody having to be the same domain. What's involved there? What's involved there is usually an IT guy to configure it so that everybody's on the same domain. You know, I had to get our IT guy to help me configure that because he's the one that had the administrator rights and permissions and the knowledge to configure it on the same domain. So yeah, you probably want to get an IT guy to get you guys on the same domain. The Revit model moves outside your existing project folder structure. Please let people know this. Yeah. Guys, when you save a Revit server model, it gets saved up to a server. It's not in your file structure anymore. It's not inside your local server machine. It's on a faraway server. It's inside of a virtual environment somewhere. It's, you know, from what I've been told by Autodesk, it's not even an RVT file. It's like this, it's a broken down file that lives on a server so it can be saved to different work sets and stuff, or the work sets can be saved to it. Lots of questions. Thanks. You're welcome. Can you install 2015 on the same 2014? Yes. You can install all the different versions of Revit Server side by side. You can absolutely do it. Now, I will say this. Your version of Windows Server doesn't support all the different Revit servers, so you might not be able to install like Revit Server 2011 on your new Windows Server machine. So you probably can't get it that far back. You know what I mean? Like, so you probably could install maybe 3 versions of it on that same version of Windows Server. So it depends on what version of Windows Server you have. But yeah, you can install them all side by side, but it's, again, it's more management. It's more having to go through it, but pretty much the same install. Can you have multiple versions? Yes. Can user access and other project files from project? Once they save the central file, they will no longer be able to access the central from P Project CAD. Yes, thank you. How does Bluestreak work with Revit Server? I tried Bluestreak a long time ago. I don't know how it actually works with Revit Server, so I don't know how to answer that. I actually haven't touched Bluestreak. It's kind of gone off the radar, so I don't know that they're even developing it anymore, but it might or it might not work. I don't know. You can try it. If it doesn't work, just use AOL Instant Messenger. I mean, it really doesn't matter. As long as you have some messaging app that you guys can communicate, I don't see why you would need necessarily Bluestreak. All right, guys. Thank you very much for the questions, and I appreciate all the input, and I do appreciate everybody's time, too. I know time is valuable.
Thank you for a great presentation, Robert. This concludes our broadcast today. If you have any additional questions, simply reply to the confirmation or reminder email you receive from GoToMeeting, and we will route those to the appropriate parties to get your questions answered. Also, you will be receiving an email containing a link to the recording of today's presentation. Once again, if you could please take a few moments to answer the short survey, we would appreciate it. It will automatically appear when you close the session. Thank you for attending today's webcast, and have a great day.